You are watching One Book, One Review with Wiebke.
Hey everyone, today I want to tell you about The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. This is the story of a young boy who lives in England at the beginning of World War II. David, who has just lost his mother to a disease, is not very happy, and his life gets even worse when his father meets another woman and they have another child. So David is stuck in this new home with this new stepmother and this new half-brother, and he really doesn't like any of them. And his father is off at work, working for secret government things, and he's stuck in this old house with a lot of books, and the books are sort of his refuge. He just goes there and reads a story, and he loves the story. That was the connection he had with his mother. They connected over stories, and so these stories sort of talk to him. He feels like they're alive. And that's where the second part of the book begins. The beginning is a little bit slow, I thought, but once David enters the world of imagination, it gets a little bit more action-packed and more interesting. Because one day something bad happens and David wants to run away. And he runs away into a land of stories. He finds himself in a strange world where all the fairy tales and all the stories come true. And they're a little bit different there. They're not as happy ever after as he always expected them to be and as they were in his books. David is now in the land of stories, and of course he has to overcome a lot of adventures on his way home. And that's what the main part of the story is about. And I really like the part with the fairy tales, how all the stories came together to create this one world and how things were changed, how they were not happy ever after and not just bright and everything turns out well. And yeah, there are still the we teach you part. That's the part I really didn't like that much about the book. Like in fairy tales, you're meant to learn something from the story. And this book is there teaching you a little bit too much, like love your stepmother, love your new half-brother, and just enjoy life and just be nice to people and be a good man. David sort of has to grow up in this story, and that was a little bit too much for me. But then again, I'm a grown-up. I don't need to learn all this stuff anymore. So I think it's much more interesting and enjoyable with the adventures for younger readers than for me. But nevertheless, I really liked the story. I liked all the characters that David met in the fairy tales, like the woodsman, for example, or Roland the knight, or Fletcher, and also the bad guy, the crooked man. He's really interesting and well done. So I liked the characters that were created, and overall I liked reading it. I just cannot say I loved the book. It was an enjoyable read, but I wasn't totally invested in it. And I was also tricked. Looking at this book, it is a monster. It's about 500 pages. But this is where the story ends. After 350 pages, the story is told. I was starting to wonder how they want to tell more after David was almost home again by 300-something pages. And then I realized that the last part of the book, like 150 pages or so, is about all the stories that are told in the book. So there are a lot of fairy tales and mythical creatures featured in the book and referenced. And I recognize them because I know most of the stories. And so I thought, like, what is the rest about it? Gives you a quote from the book and tells you where that story comes from, what it was meant to be. And I have to say I didn't read it, I just looked at it because it wasn't interesting to me. But I thought maybe it's more interesting to younger readers who don't know all the other stories, who don't understand all the references that I talked about. So that part makes it more interesting for readers who don't know all the other stories. But I don't think it's necessary to read that part with the origins of all the fairy tales and the original stories. If you have a basic knowledge of fairy tales and mythical creatures, you can get the story without reading the rest. That's all I can say about the book. Let me know what you thought of it, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye bye.